Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Joe and Joe Weather Show, and we've added another J for tonight, but it's not a Joe, it's a Jim. He's our guest for tonight, meteorologist Jim Witt. Those of you who are in the Hudson Valley know Jim very well, and welcome aboard. Thanks for coming on tonight. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Joe and Joe. It's a privilege to be here with two renowned meteorologists. Let's put it
Oh,
that way.
we're infamous.
Well, it's good. It's good to be here, guys. You guys both have a good reputation. Let me put it that way.
Well, thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Jim.
Yeah,
And again, we're very pleased to have you on tonight. Here in the Hudson Valley, Joe, he is well known in the Hudson Valley, almost a legend, if I may use that term, the living legend of meteorology. He's been on our local station here in northern Westchester, WHUD. And in fact, Jim, you're still doing you've been on WHUD now for I don't even want to count the years, but you've been on for an awful long time on that one station, haven't you?
just shy of 50 years, Joe.
God
Wow.
bless.
Can you imagine?
That's awesome.
And I'm only 38 years old, which is great.
Yeah, how'd you do that?
Oh, not exactly. A little bit of fib there, little fib.
Oh, God. All right, so we're going to be talking tonight, Jim. We're going to be talking long range. As long as as long as the technicals work on my end, I'm keeping my fingers crossed on that.
Okay.
And tonight's Joe and Joe Weather Show is brought to you by Omni. The Omni True Value Hardware, Long Island's largest rock salt provider, rock salt, straight salt bag, geomelt, biomelt, and much more. They're ready for the winter, okay?
Okay.
The question is, are you ready for the winter at home? So no matter what you need, shovels, salt, sand, spreaders, etc., snow blowers, or you got a fleet of people removing snow, Omni True Value Hardware will meet your needs, serving the Long Island and New York City area, 1226 North Wellwood Avenue, West Babylon, New York, 631-756-1125. The website is omnitruevalue.com. Okay, something went wrong here. I lost my omnitruevalue.com image, but that's okay. We bring it back. It's right there on the bug on the lower left. All right, Mr. Witt, you are well. Joe, what do you think we should talk about? Go do the weather stuff first, or talk about Jim's?
You know what? I think that might be the best thing, Jim. If you don't mind, we're just going to take a quick look at the weather for the coming days ahead. We wanted to have Jim on tonight because we know that come Thursday and Friday,
Oh boy.
we're going to have our hands full. So
Yeah.
we didn't want to squeeze Jim out on a Thursday or Friday. So we'll get the weather tonight. We'll get the forecast out of the way first, and then we'll talk more with Mr. Witt about his career, about his methodology for long-range weather forecasts, and about his charity that he has been working with for all these many years. And for those of you who might be interested, Jim has a long-range calendar, and if you're interested in getting hold of a copy for yourself, we're going to tell you all about that as well. So we'll get all of that a little bit later. But Joe, why don't we start off with the latest on the?
And Jim, you can jump in with the weather stuff too. We'll make it a threesome here and talk about what's going on with the fact that we have a pretty unusual situation here where we have Zeta was a hurricane, back to tropical storm, probably becomes a hurricane, goes into southeast Louisiana where all storms go this year.
Wow. Yeah.
And now it seems like we have this sort of two-part equation to figure out where you have this remnant, whatever's going to be left of it, and I think there is going to be a viable core that's going to survive as it moves northeastward. That's going to do its thing with rain, and then we're going to get some cold air coming in on the backside with a second low that's going to develop Friday morning. and that might bring some snow. Maybe might even bring. I'm thinking it might even bring in some wet snowflakes mixing in here down at the coast before it's all said and done, and maybe even a slushy, inch or two or three up in some of the elevated areas as you go up north and west. Have you looked at all the stuff today, and have you seen what's going on?
I have. Joe, have you?
Oh,
Joe?
I have, yes.
Joe R?
Yeah. My wife was a little annoyed because she wanted to do some yard work first thing in the morning tomorrow, and she was a little surprised when I said, "Well, guess what? It looks like we've got a period of rain starting after midnight and running till about noon tomorrow." What do you mean rain? and and yeah, the sun will come out. Maybe we'll get a
Maybe.
cameo appearance by the sun tomorrow afternoon, but then batten down because then, as Joe just mentioned, we've got the remnant effects of Zeta and another disturbance that may coalesce Thursday and Friday over our area and dump more atrocious conditions over our area for the latter part of the week.
It's been an amazing, amazing hurricane season. And when you think of where these storms are all ending up, I mean, you got a small area between Louisiana, Texas, Alabama. I mean, that's where they all seem to be centering around. Now, Joe, you do a lot of research. You have to find out why that is.
Well, when I get a couple of seconds, I'll take a look at why that is, Jim.
Right.
But Joe and I, we've been following all of these storms, and we've been talking about how Joe, this is what the fourth or fifth. I've lost count already for Louisiana.
Mm.
yeah. This is what this. I think it's the. Might it be the sixth? No, the fifth. This would be the fifth. The fifth hurricane to make landfall in Louisiana, which would be a record. The record I believe was four. I think it was back in 2005 for that one. I mean, Laura was a major. The other ones were not. I don't want to say they were minimal hurricanes, but because that takes away from the impact to have that many storms go over, and you had two of them basically go over the same place in western Louisiana, and they still hadn't recovered from the first one.
Right.
The satellite tonight shows the circulation of Zeta's pretty large. There seems to be a well-defined core. The storm probably has until maybe tomorrow midday before it starts to get further north in the Gulf, because the shelf water in the Gulf of Mexico is colder, so it probably won't strengthen much beyond a minimal hurricane. At least that's the plan. And then, of course, you already see the clouds that are running from back from New Mexico northeast toward the Great Lakes, and that's this early Southern Plains, Southern Rockies, actually all of the Rockies, but the last day or two it's been the Southern Rockies with this major winter storm that's gone on out there, major snow and ice storm. And we're basically going to be setting the table here for the arrival of this kind of 1-2 punch. I think that's probably the best way to describe it.
It's been yeah, a 1-2 punch indeed. For us, it looks like we're going to get well, maybe about a quarter of an inch, a tenth to a quarter of an inch of rain with a little minor wave of low pressure passing to our south tonight and early tomorrow. And then the combination of the remnants of Zeta and also an upper level storm that's going to, again, kind of join forces with the remnants of Zeta to produce, I think, Joe, for the Hudson Valley, and maybe even heavier amounts further south, at least a couple of inches of rain here. It looks like that kicks in beginning Thursday morning, becomes steadier and heavier Thursday afternoon into Thursday evening, and then we start watching for the fun as all of this begins moving offshore and the winds turn into the north and northwest, and the cold air comes pouring on in. We may see a changeover during the first half of Friday to wet snow, and I'm not yet ready to stick my neck out and say that in parts of the immediate Hudson Valley area, Westchester, Putnam, Rockland, or even Orange County, will see any significant accumulations. But certainly elevated areas, the higher up you go, the better the odds that we're going to be looking at some snow accumulations, even though we're still in October. But that certainly is a viable possibility and certainly worth mentioning as we move into Thursday night, late into early Friday.
I have the Weather Service digital forecast for snowfall up on the screen right now, and I mean they basically kind of went from a coating to a couple of inches. The southern flank, Joe and Jim, looks like it runs. Let's say Route 84. It's probably the easiest way to sort of describe it. So it looks like everything is pretty much north and west of 84, and you start to get into some several inch amounts in the Catskills. Then it lightens up a bit as you go east of the Hudson, and then it picks up again when you get into the Berkshires, 2-3 inches up in western Mass, and then heading up into Vermont. This is an early forecast because we're still at Tuesday night, so I imagine we're probably going to see the Weather Service do some adjusting in the next 2 days to some of these numbers when you start to figure out. There's always in a situation like this, there's always going to be a few places that are going to be target zones, and we're not going to really know too much about that until we get a bit closer. I just want to say, by the way, Joe Rayo is monitoring the chat board. So as we go through tonight, especially later on when we start to go through Jim's long range, if you have questions, put them up on the chat board, and we will try to get to as many as we can. And if you want to get on the chat board, just you have to subscribe to my YouTube channel and then use your Gmail account, and then you can go ahead and join the chat board and chat away.
I think it would warm the cockles of Jim's heart to know that not a few people on the chat board already are talking about Jim and their memories of Jim over the years. James Volpe, for example, said, when I was a kid, my mom would put on WHUD, and I had to put up with that classical music they played at that time, but it was worth it because they were so good at the weather and school closings, and I remember Jim Witt very well. So you see, Jim, a lot of people, and that indeed, they didn't play classical, they played beautiful music, instrumental.
That's right.
Music. They did it from, they used to say it's from the terrace.
Thanks, Mom, for calling in.
But more on that a little bit later. Back to you, Joe.
Joe, with this storm, you live up pretty high on the hill up there, right?
My elevation's about 450 feet.
Yeah.
So yeah. It's at my elevation, I do see a little bit more snow than, let's say, down
in the valley
in northern Westchester or other locales, and
right.
And I'm not happy about. I would have loved that when I was 30, 40 years ago when Joe and I were really, storm lovers and
when we were 30 or 40 years old. Yes.
But now I could do without the snow. So,
yeah.
But
well, I'm with you on that. By the way, with the rainfall, Joe and Jim, I have the rainfall map, and it's every bit of 2 to 3 inches for most of eastern Pennsylvania to southern New England, but particularly for southern and southeastern New England, where there's a severe to extreme drought still going on here. So I'm hoping that in this area that we wind up getting maybe a little bit of upside and finish above some of the forecast numbers, because that'll do a lot of good. Now you run up the Hudson Valley and you head up north of I-90, the liquid amounts start to tail off to less than an inch, and then eventually when you get up into northern New York and further north into Vermont, New Hampshire, and into Maine, we're talking about under a quarter of an inch. So this is really primarily an event from southern New England, southeastern New England, on westward to much of Pennsylvania, and then of course you head down into southern New Jersey, down into Maryland, Delaware, Virginia. There's all those areas getting some significant rainfall amounts of 2 to 3 inches, and that kind of lines up pretty well with the Hurricane Center's forecast, because they have this east-west band, and I have it here somewhere. But yeah, they have this east-west band from WPC, the weather prediction folks, of 2 to 4 inches running pretty much as I described. So this is the part of the forecast, at least from the standpoint of rain, because of how dry things are in some places. The higher the number, the better. I mean, we don't want to go too high. You don't want half a foot of rain, but if we could squeeze out this 2 to 3, this would work out quite well.
Joe, if you noticed when you look probably at the GFS, because I forecast in Maine each day, you notice that Maine almost misses out on this completely.
Yes, they do.
It's like only maybe Bar Harbor would get some rain and maybe a few flurries, but the bulk of the moisture stays south of Maine.
Yes.
Crazy.
Yeah. Well, the way the setup is, it plays well. I know the winter weather lovers are looking at a situation like this and thinking, let's get to January already.
Yeah, right.
Indeed. Indeed.
The my favorite satellite loop that I put up every night is the Canadian satellite loop because I think it's a really good tool to look at. Although once they get a lot of snow cover there, it gets a little tougher to figure it out. But you get a good view of the machinery up in Canada at work, and there's a really strong shortwave that is coming down between Great Slave Lake and Lake Winnipeg that is heading southeastward, and that is going to be the driver, really, of all of this. The Zeta's timing, in a way, is a good thing in that it's not really getting involved with the trough is acting as a kicker for it and just causing it to accelerate. I don't think it's going to be a situation like Isaias, which was different because that came straight up the coast. The impacts of the upper trough will probably strengthen this as it goes off the coast, so that the bulk of the strengthening will go on to the east, which is good because that'll keep the winds down. I'm just wondering, Joe Rayo, I'm just wondering here, at least from Thursday into Friday, we got a full moon Saturday, and we're going to get into a northeast wind eventually out of this, a northeast to east wind, or go east and then northeast. I'm wondering whether there might be some tidal concerns.
Well, of course, with a full moon, we have astronomically higher than normal tides, spring tides as they're called, not because of the season, but because it actually is derived from the German "despringen," which means the tides at full moon seem to spring up. I think actually we're lucky because if you remember, Joe, when we had new moon about a week or week and a half ago, that moon was near the closest point to the Earth, the perigee point. This full moon actually is going to be what it's the opposite of what the media likes to call the supermoon. This is not a supermoon. The moon will be at apogee. It'll be at its farthest point from the Earth. It's what the media likes to call a micro moon. I don't really think you can notice the difference visually, but because it's near its farthest point, the tides will not be as strong. The spring tides will not be as strong as what we had at new moon just again about 10 days ago, and that's kind of fortunate because with this storm and with this northeasterly fetch, we could have it would only serve to aggravate the situation with much higher than normal tides. But the tides are going to be bad enough. I'm sure we're going to see from the National Weather Service, both in Philadelphia and also in New York, and even up in Boston. They're probably going to be issuing their fair share of coastal flood advisories for the potential of that onshore wind causing, localized inundation and also maybe even a little bit of beach erosion as well. We're getting into that time of the year, folks.
I brought up the Weather Service watches and warnings that are up this evening, and of course you can see where the hurricane warnings are up for southeast Louisiana from Morgan City to actually it looks like they've extended the hurricane warnings further east into toward the Florida Panhandle, if I'm reading this map correctly. I don't know, Joe, if you can jump on and pull up an advisory just to double check on that for me, and also flash flood watches that are up out of this that run up into northeast Georgia. To northern Georgia. We'll probably see additional flash flood watches start going up tomorrow. Meanwhile, ice storm warnings through much of central Oklahoma and into North Texas, with winter storm warnings covering all of West Texas, the eastern half of New Mexico, with winter weather advisory surrounding it. This part of the equation is starting to wind down a bit. The one thing I did want to check, at least through this morning, I'm going to pull up the snowfall analysis so we can take a look at what this thing's done in the last 72 hours. Snow cover across North America, by the way, guys, has blossomed in the last week due to this particular storm. But the snowfall amounts through this morning, anyway, were fairly substantial. You can see the large area of 6 to 12 and 12 plus running from central New Mexico northward up to Colorado and into southern Wyoming, accumulating snows in northwest Texas. That just basically happened today. And of course, a lot of ice. I saw some video out from Oklahoma, from central Oklahoma, of power grids, and the boxes outside, they started flaming up because of the all the icing. So this is an unusual winter storm in that it is pretty far south for the end of October.
There is a storm surge warning, Joe, in effect. We'll get them going back to the hurricane scenario here. Storm surge warning in effect for the mouth. I hope I pronounced this correctly. For the mouth of the Atchafalaya River.
I think it's Atchafalaya, yeah.
And to Navarre, Florida.
Right.
Lake Borgne or Borgne. Lake. Why do they have such crazy?
You know what? I have to actually see it how it's spelled so I can remember it.
Lake Pontchartrain.
No, Pontchartrain.
Pontchartrain, Pensacola Bay, and Mobile Bay, and a hurricane warning is in effect for Morgan City, Louisiana, to the Mississippi-Alabama border.
Okay, so that actually has stayed the same. So the map's a little deceiving because they use similar colors for the same thing.
Right. Lake Pontchartrain, Lake Maurepas, and Metropolitan New Orleans. Hurricane warning in effect.
All right, I'm not gonna. I'll let that one go because I got to I have to sort of see it in front of me. I'll correct it later if it needs needs correcting.
Jim, in case you didn't know, Joe for a while was on-camera meteorologist down in New Orleans.
Wow!
Goes back in the early '80s. Back
when I was young enough to have fun.
Do you ever see a thunderstorm down there, Joe? No, I guess not, huh?
To this day, nothing has surpassed a thunderstorm experience that I had down there, which happened at about 11 o'clock in the morning, and it got so dark that it was night. It was nighttime. It was. I'm not just talking about it gets dark where the street lights come on, like when you have thunderstorms here in the evening in the summertime when it's still daylight. And I'm talking the sky. The sky was black, and it got the dark of night at 11 o'clock in the morning, and the lightning and thunder was like I've never seen or heard. And the station itself, we took such a lightning hit that it basically fried everything. All our weather equipment was fried, and half the technical equipment just to get the station on the air. The Hurricane Center forecast taking it into southeast Louisiana late tomorrow afternoon. And then you can see, folks, how it accelerates northeastward. Thursday afternoon, there's a remnant depression in western Virginia. By Friday morning, so 12 hours later, this thing really starts to move very quickly. It is south and east of Montauk, just at about 40 and 70. And then moving away, and it's not this that's going to cause a problem for Friday with regards to snow. It's after it goes by, a second low forms, and you start to get the cold air to drain down, and that's the part that we're not quite getting yet. But it's Jim, I've been kidding for the last couple of months because of the strange nature of 2020 and all these, all the bizarre things that have happened with respect to the pandemic, that I said my prediction was that the next thing that would happen, that we would have a major hurricane move up the East Coast, become extratropical, and produce an early season snowstorm in the Northeast. This is not quite that, but it's trying. Let's put it that way. It's trying.
In other words, a snow hurricane.
Yes.
Oh,
exactly.
Good grief.
WPC with their 7-day rainfall here. So obviously this is mostly top heavy or front loaded. So we're seeing some big amounts back through Oklahoma and Kansas, throughout much of the Ohio and Tennessee Valley. Of course, you see that stripe that comes from the Gulf of Mexico into southeast Louisiana, and then goes northeastward up to the central Appalachians, and then turns sharply to the right, northern Virginia, to about New York City on south, that band of 3 inches plus, and then you've got the inch and a half going up. Well, not quite to I-90, but maybe somewhere halfway between, say, 287 and I-90, and running into southern and southeastern New England. Again, that's a good thing if it does wind up happening, that they get the heavy rainfall. And I don't have I didn't preload the loop, so we'll skip that. We'll just go. Let's go to the GFS, the late day run. I don't know about you guys. I really didn't see anything too much different here today in terms of the logic of what's going to happen. The storm center in eastern Tennessee by Thursday morning on the GFS, in northern Virginia by Tuesday afternoon. You can see all the heavy rain, and you start to see a little bit of blue way up in upstate New York on the northern fringe late Thursday afternoon. Thursday evening, the low is just east of the New Jersey coast. It would seem to me that this first batch of rain might go out. We may actually get a short break before the second round fires up. I'm talking about maybe a handful of hours. And then you start to see it all form again. Now, by Friday morning, much of New York State is in blue, and you start to see some of the darker blues show up. That sinks southeastward Monday afternoon because the low begins to pull away. I don't know how much precip we're going to be able to grind out during the morning and afternoon. But if we wind up seeing some snow here down at the coast mixing in, I think the snow lovers will be dancing in the streets. And again, as we pointed out, for the inland spots, it's maybe a slushy inch or two or three in some of the elevated areas. Who knows? Maybe if there's a little burst someplace, somebody could wind up with a bit more. And then it's going to get cold. I mean, I'm thinking we're going to be dropping through the 40s here on Friday, and probably into the 30s in a lot of places before Friday evening, especially north and west of the coast, Mr. Rayo.
I think actually, Joe, I think during the day on Thursday, midday and afternoon, I think the temperatures are going to kind of level off at about the mid 40s to around 50, and then begin sliding down slowly through the 40s. And on Friday, after whatever we get in the morning, snow or flurries or rain changing to snow, I think the sun will start coming out late in the day. But I don't really see, I mean, in the Hudson Valley, I think temperatures on average on Friday will be within a few degrees of 40,
Yeah,
for a high temperature.
Exactly.
And add to
what
that,
I said.
if you look at the isobars, they're pretty much packed. So you're going to add, with the low temperatures, plenty of wind.
Yeah. I'm bringing up
the
the version of the GFS that's got, you can see the isobars better. Yeah, the gradient's fairly tight here, and in fact, starting from Thursday night, once the first low goes out, that's when we start to get that northeast wind, and we'll see if that's going to produce some tidal concerns here going Thursday night, and especially into the first part of Friday until the low pulls away. And what do you think, Joe? Saturday morning, freezing temperatures are below for just about everybody?
Oh yeah, well I think actually, Joe, we could see near freezing temperatures. I think on Friday, which is the reason why we're mentioning the possibility of snow. And then as we get into actually, I'll tell you what, I'm thinking Friday night. Friday night, I'm thinking of temperatures in the upper 20s. Friday morning, maybe mid 30s, upper 20s to around 30 Friday night, and then we'll warm up. If you can hold temperatures in the upper 30s to near 40 for both Saturday night and Sunday night. Of course, Saturday important because it's Halloween. I'm not sure what the situation is with COVID, with kids going around trick or treating this year. But if they are trick or treating, and if there are any kids out there, you better make sure you have something heavy underneath that costume Saturday afternoon, especially Saturday night, because this is going to be one of the colder Halloweens in recent years, at least in my memory. It's pretty chilly when you have walking around, ringing doorbells or trying to get candy with temperatures only in the 30s.
Agreed. Stay home.
Dress up like an Eskimo.
That's
Nobody,
it.
Unfortunately, on Halloween, nobody delivers the candy. You have to go to them.
Yeah.
Now I'm looking. I brought up the upper air so we could watch the Canadian part of the jet stream. Jim, Since late July, not in a straight line, but since late July, the Canadian part of the jet stream has been unusually active at times. In fact, we've seen instances of troughs being dropped pretty far south.
Mm-hmm.
In the month of August, we had two instances of troughs digging all the way down into the Gulf, toward the Gulf Coast, which is pretty unusual. And we're in this other, we seem to be in this stretch where um, the Canadian jet wants to be active. And of course, we're seeing it played out with what's going on. This is how the upper air is playing out with this particular storm. You can clear. You see the three. The three players are all here on the board. I'll just mark them out, mark them off for you. There's Zeta. Here is the upper air storm that's driving the Southern Plains storm system, and then you've got this very active northern jet with upper lows sitting up in one and up in Canada, one north of Alaska, short waves moving along it, and well, one picks it up, kicks it on out, and then of course we see our weather improve on Saturday. But there's another deep trough that's coming through here, Joe and Jim, for Sunday night with another cold front, and we're probably going to get a shot of even maybe I think it might even be colder than what we're seeing Friday night and Saturday to come in for the very first part of next week.
I think from this vantage point, Joe, for Election Day Tuesday, very important day. I think we don't have to worry about any unsettled or adverse weather locally. Kind of a blend or mix of cloud and sun. And from my vantage point here in the Hudson Valley, probably low to mid 50s, maybe a touch milder for New York City and Long Island. But again, it does not look like anything that's going to keep you from getting to the polls, although so many people have been going to the polls already. But for the actual day of the elections on Tuesday, the weather I think will be on our side for the year of 2020.
Now, after that, the pattern relaxes a bit. Looks like we get some troughing that eventually winds up trying to drop down in the west, and a bit of a ridge here in the eastern part of the United States toward the end of next week. And that Canadian jet, though, is still hanging around afterwards. So whether what that means down the road, I don't know. But I think at this point now we can switch over to we'll talk. I'll bring up Jim's long range stuff that you sent me, Mr. Witt. I will just keep your fingers crossed that I do this right technically, because sometimes I have a fat finger. So.
Well, as you're doing that, Joe, I'll ask Jim.
Well, we're still on a 3-shot here, so you just you go ahead, and then when you're ready, just tell me to put the first graphic up, and I'll do that, and we can get started.
Well, Jim's lineage in weather forecasting goes back into the 60s when he was teaching at Lakeland High School, and it was a weather club, right, Jim? It was a
Yes.
Lakeland Weather Club,
Right.
and it was amazing in the sense that you had, for high school kids, you had like a full scale weather operation going. You had teleprinters there.
Oh yeah.
And
radar.
Radar. It was just
Can you imagine?
amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, how did you end up with all of that stuff?
I begged and borrowed, Joe. I asked everybody. I wrote about 300 letters. Now, this is not when you could do it by computer and email it out. You really had to sit down and write 300 letters to all different Air Force bases, weather bureaus. Do you have a radar for us? And one day I was teaching.
Let me look in my closet.
Yeah, right.
My wife doesn't throw anything away. She might have a radar in there. Let me take a look.
But what happened? One day I was teaching an earth science class, and a kid comes in and says, "There's a phone call from you from Oklahoma." I figured, what the heck could this all be about? So I went, and sure enough, the guy said, I'm at Tinker Air Force Base. We have a radar set for you. All you have to do is come and pick it up. I said, in Oklahoma? He says, well, so I said, well, hold on to it. Let me see what I can do. And so I called somebody in Chicago and I said, "Do you have any influence down there?" The guy says, "Well, I'm a commander or whatever." He said, "Let me talk to them." So they called me back and they said, "You live near Griffiths Air Force Base?" I said, "Pretty close." So they shipped it to Griffiths. So I went up there and I said, "You guys deal with Stewart at all?" They said, "Oh, yeah." So I said, "Could you take this radar down to Stewart Airport?" They said, "I think so." So I went to Stewart and I said, "They're going to ship a radar down here. Why take it off here? Why not drive it right to the high school?" And so one day they came, they brought the radar and they brought all the wires and put them all over the floor. I said, "Now what?" They said, "Well, now you put it up." I said, "You got to be kidding me." And so I contacted Lakehurst, New Jersey. They sent up 4 guys for 2 weeks and set up the radar. And I said to them, "What happens if it breaks?" "Oh, I don't know." Well, I got them to come back every month and retune it and teach the kids how to do it. So after about 3 or 4 months, we said, "You don't have to come back anymore. We can repair the radar ourselves."
Isn't that
And so
amazing?
there we had a radar set. And it worked. Oh my gosh. You have no idea. There was a brownout in New York City one day and they had a power outage, and they called me up and they said, "You have the radar, right?" They said, "Could you go and look out in the western part of PA and see if there's a bad storm out there?" I said, "Okay." So I looked at it, and that's where a little bit of trigonometry, Sakatoa, sine equals opposite over the hypotenuse, and all that. I could measure and saw the tops of the clouds were about 70,000. You know what that means as a weather guy,
Yeah.
and it was coming east. And so they issued the severe weather and flood warnings, and New York City subways were flooded like anything, but they could do it from the radar from the kids.
That's
Interesting.
that's amazing. And of course you also your weather club and also your whole operation made the cover of WeatherWise magazine. They promoted you very heavily through that back in
Yes.
the 60s.
And also the New York Times had a full page article on the Lakeland weather. And Joe, where these kids are now that were in the weather club.
That's right. Some of them are, in fact, one of them I think is working on the on trying to improve the GFS model.
He's right. Yeah, Dr. Jordan Albert. He's still working on it.
I was gonna say yes. I hope so because it's. it's
Now, Joe.
I know.
Hey, listen.
It just seems sometimes. I'm joking, really. It seems sometimes it's one step forward, 2 steps back with these model upgrades lately. But
Oh,
go
I know
ahead.
it. Well, Jordan was pretty upset with that, but I can't, speak out of turn. But I mean, I think the European model on a far distance out further is more accurate. Jordan will usually say to me, beyond 7 days, he doesn't see much value in the model of the
There's too much
GFS.
variability the further
Oh,
out you go.
oh
And
yeah.
look at what happened last week, where the week before, all the long range, all the little teleconnections and all that stuff, were all pointing to a cold finish to October,
Yes.
a negative North Atlantic oscillation, the positive Pacific North America index, ridge in the west, trough in the east. The Arctic oscillation was going to be negative, so everything would be, all the cold air would be displaced southward. And what happened? You had hardly any of the models showed any indication of Hurricane Epsilon, which developed from a cold upper low, and lo and behold, suddenly the whole upper profile across the North Atlantic, across North America, and beyond completely changed. And that was
Right.
not. I mean, we were literally days. I'm not talking 7 days. Maybe even a couple of days from all of this getting underway, and all of a sudden there's a hurricane there that just takes the whole upper air on the Atlantic and just completely changes it 180 degrees. So yeah, after 7 days, there's just too much variability.
And another one of my students from Lakeland is the director of research of the National Hurricane Center, and Dr. Frank Marks, that is, and he will say, we're pretty good now on saying where the storm will hit. Have you noticed that? They're pretty accurate on the location and the path. What they can't get right is the intensity of the storm.
Joe and I have mentioned that many times. The same thing. The forecast for the forecast error inside 48 hours has shrunk down to less than 20 miles, which is phenomenal.
It's good.
It really is. But the intensity part of the equation is another story.
I mean, here they were predicting a Category 2 on this last storm, and all of a sudden it was a Category 4.
Yeah.
Jim, we have somebody on the chat board I'm looking at right now. Maybe his name is familiar, maybe not, because it was a long time ago. A gentleman by the name of Carl Weitz, Weitz, and he says that you were his teacher.
Yep.
He said, damn, that was 50 years ago.
Right.
I was 18, a freshman, intro to meteorology.
Yep.
And he said that you gave him an A.
Must have been a nice kid. Well, I had an interesting situation back then. I was gifted as to be a good teacher. I know that. And the first year I was teaching earth science, the youngsters were getting very good grades. And the principal called me down to his office. He said, Mr. Witt, you're going to have a lot of trouble in June. I said, why is that? He said, well, I looked over your first quarter grades and your midterms, and you got all the kids, they're all getting 90s. I said, well, I think they know what they're doing. And he says, yeah, well, you're going to talk to the parents at the end of the year when these kids fail. I said, all right. Well, at least 70% of the kids got over 90, and 100% of the kids passed. And so I was able to teach the kids, and because they were so excited with what we were doing, I didn't have to do anything. All I had to do was excite them, and they taught each other what was going on. And that's why these kids, another one of the kids was the lead forecaster for NASA, for launching rockets. Another one is the executive vice president of a major weather company. I won't mention the big one. All right. Well, anyway,
you can.
The AccuWeather. I mean, these kids did very, very, very well.
And you received it, and you received because of all of your teachings and all of these people who went through your classes or whatever. That a few years ago, the American Meteorological Society, the AMS, actually gave you a special award for all that you have done over your illustrious career of teaching.
I didn't know anything about that, Joe, to tell you the truth. And they called me. They said, would you go out to Washington State and pick up the special award? And I said, no, I really hate to travel. I don't feel like going out there. I didn't know what the special award really was. They only give out, I think, one a year in the whole world.
Right.
And these kids, my kids, I call them kids, they put together the whole program so that I would get that award. So I was, oh my God, that's the best award I ever got.
Well, I'm glad we now have the foundation of the story regarding your methodology for long range, because now the fact that you were a teacher and the fact that you were training all of these youngsters or whatever actually helped you now, because
yes,
in 1966, and for some reason, I don't know if you remember, Joe, I for whatever reason, I do not remember this gentleman when he was on the local television airwaves in 66. I remember his predecessor. There was a young lady on Channel 2 CBS who did the weather, Carol Reed.
Yep.
She was doing the weather for many years on Channel 2.
Yep.
And the person who came after this gentleman, Gordon Barnes, who was like the same thing, because he liked to do a lot of long-range forecasting too.
He got it from me.
Yeah, and so for 1 year, one year in 1966, we had this gentleman by the name of Harry Geiss. And Harry Geis in October of 1966 went on the air, made a prediction. Jim, you were watching the prediction. I guess you were stunned by what this gentleman said. And then when the prediction came true, you contacted this.
I wrote him a letter.
And
I said, I can't believe it.
And like a magician, Joe, magicians, I know they do their own special, tricks and acts or whatever, but they never reveal their secrets to anybody else.
Right.
But because of the fact that Jim was associated with Lakeland High School and because
and kids
and talking to the kids or whatever, Harry Geis said to you, what did he say to you, Jim?
He said, Jim, you're a teacher. It looks like you're a dedicated guy. I wouldn't do this normally, but I'm going to give you a few steps on how it's done. And so he gave me a few steps. He said, this is the starting date, and this is how I did the snowstorm. And he said, here's a paper I'm going to give you to show you how it's done. And from that, I've been able to spend another 50 years almost in researching and doing a better job on what Harry did. It wasn't an accident that he called for a major snowstorm on December 24th, 1966, and the Weather Bureau the day before had a storm in the Gulf and said it would go out to sea, and Harry Geis got on TV, it was Channel 2, and he put up a big sign over the TV, and all it said was snow.
And when did he make his original forecast for this snowstorm in December of Christmas Eve, Jim?
Somewhere in October. Yeah.
Nice.
But when he showed me the system, I was able to glean some other things from it, because when he gave me the system of how he did it, I could see why he did it back in October, because that was the trigger date for the storm. So he waited until he saw what was happening in October, and that, he said, that's the trigger. And then when we got, I think, snow somewhere around the 4th or 6th in December, then he went bananas. He just knew, because that was going to repeat itself right at Christmas time. He was a sharp cookie.
But
he really was.
He was only here for 1 year, and then I guess he got a better offer from California, because he went to California, and he became somewhat of like the Frank Field of, I'm not sure if it's Sacramento or San Francisco or whatever, but he settled down and he became known over many, many years out there. But he was here for just 1 year. But that 1 year that he was here, he made a big impression on
a lot of people and me. Anyway, but I would say this. He was originally from California. He originally worked with Dr. Crick.
Right, Dr. Crick, who was
his teacher. Right, also a long-range forecaster. And Harry Geis said, I'm a regular guy. I just want to give weather. Don't put all this stuff on my face. They owe makeup and everything else. He said, I don't want all that. Well, eventually he said, I had enough with CBS. I'm going back to California. And he and I communicated for, I would say, maybe 8 years after that.
That's pretty good. But the thing is, you got the information or learned how to do this from Harry Geis. You went through your own period of experimenting and implementing your own kind of theories as to how this all works. And eventually you started making your forecasts, long-range forecasts on WHUD. And the first year that you began with the calendar was what, 1986?
Right on, Joe. You're right there. That's right. The first year we did it, we made 1,000 calendars. And because we did so few calendars, it cost us $4 a calendar to print. We sold them for $5. We made $1,000, and that was the first year we gave Friends of Karen $1,000. That was our first.
This may be an indelicate question, and if you don't have to answer it if you...
Shoot it at me, Joe.
We all know Jerry Lewis. Of course, he did tremendous work for MDA, the Muscular Dystrophy Association.
Jerry Lewis? Oh, yeah. Wonderful.
And the thing is that people would ask him always, Jerry, why are you so much into this? Why are you so? Did you put so much effort into MDA? Did you know somebody who had MDA, or did you have a relative or something like that? And Jerry never would say why. He would always say, "I'm just out here to make the money and to help my kids." And to his dying day, we still don't know why he put such an effort, but he made all of this money for them. So what I'd like to ask you is, you've been so good with children's charities, with the Hope for Youth Foundation. I was just, and you have made selling the calendar and doing other things. Here's a copy of last year's calendar, 2019,
Mm-hmm.
and you've done so much good work with them. Is there any specific reason why, you could have just done the calendar, grabbed the money for yourself, but what you've done is that you've made over $4 million, if I'm not mistaken.
About 4.8 now, Joe.
4.8.
Believe it or not.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to be off. By
Yeah, 800. 800,000. Not much to talk about, but
You've done so much for the charities. So my question is, how did this all get started? What made you go with start the foundation and go with the children's charity? If you
see, I was always good with kids when I was even young, and then when I became a teacher, I realized some kids have a tough time in life, tough time learning, and also disabilities. We had one youngster in my 9th grade class, and he had a severe disability, and he got into the weather club, and he did a great job in the weather club, and I got a scholarship for him up at Linden State at the time.
Wow.
He came back, and I hired him at Fleet Weather. And we had to carry him from station to station to do his work because he was unable to walk anymore. And he also did radio broadcasting for us, and he had a very, very raspy voice. And HUD said, we don't want him on the air anymore. So I went there and I said, do you know what's wrong with this youngster? And you're going to throw him off the air? People will put up with him. And they did, and he died while he was still working for us at Fleet Weather. So it's something, Joe, that I felt it's very important that I give back. I've had a good life, and I love kids, and right now we're dealing with youngsters that may never, ever take a step in this life or say a word.
Well, these calendars, and again, they're beautiful. Not only do they have your long range predictions, but they also have some spectacular pictures of the Hudson Valley.
Mm-hmm.
And then just give you an example here. This is from last year's calendar. And
actually, that's 2 years, Joe.
This is 2019, but you're into 2021 now.
Now it is. So 2020 is the one that's out there now.
Right.
And by the way,
that's the one.
Yeah. By the way, I put up the Hope for Youth Foundation.org website for the calendars on the chat board for those of you who are interested. So take a look. The link is there. I'll share it again for the latecomers, and it goes. The monies all go to Hope for Youth.
That's great. Hey, Joe, when you were with us at our other weather place,
Yeah.
You remember Neil Townsend?
I do. I remember Neil. Yeah.
Do you know how he and I got together?
I don't know the backstory. No.
My first year teaching at Lakeland was 1962. I was teaching my first class. The bell rang. Everybody sat down. And all of a sudden, another kid came into class, and he said, I'm not registered here. Do you have room for me? I looked around, and every seat was filled. I said, sure I do. Go down, sit in the back by the radiator. Eventually, I'll get you a chair. That was Neil Townsend, and he graduated. Eventually, got his degree in engineering and so forth. And one day I had to fire a teacher at Lakeland. And the day I fired him, Neil Townsend came into and he said, you don't have a job for a teacher, do you? And I knew what he was like. I said, I do now. Yep. And so I hired him there and then. he became a wonderful teacher, and all the stuff we did with the Weather Channel and all the stuff. He did all the programming for it, 1-900 Weather, the Weather Channel connection, all that stuff. And now Neil does all the computer work for the long range.
Hey, Jim, Carl Weitz asked earlier. I lost the whole question, but he asked if you were if you taught at WestCon, Western
Yes,
Connecticut,
I did.
back around 1970.
Yes, I taught it in WestCon. I taught at Pace, Pratt, Columbia. Yeah.
Oh, very good. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Robert Brown, this is a technical question. Robert Brown on the board said, if you were able to measure, were you about the radar set that
Yes.
you got? He said, I'm just going to read the way he has it written because
Okay.
I'm not sure. He says, if you were able to measure the height of the storms, was your radar set an FPS-6A height finder?
No, it was a AN APQ 13. We had to figure out the height by using what I learned in high school, which was SOHCAHTOA, SOHCAHTOA, and that was sine over the hypotenuse, cosine, over adjacent to the hypotenuse. And so I knew the angle because I adjusted that, and I knew the distance so I could figure out the height. Because I used.
We're talking about slide route.
Oh, of course.
Right. Yeah.
And think of this in the 1960s. I brought the kids to IBM who donated their computers for the kids. And these are the same kids like Jimmy Hack, Dr. Jimmy Hack, who in the ninth grade programmed a barotropic model, including a QPF, in the ninth grade. He was so excited.
Wow, that's amazing.
And now he's the director of the operation down in Tennessee that houses the fastest computers in the world.
These are all Doogie Housers of meteorology.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
Jim,
Jim, before we get too far off the track, and before we close out this evening, Joe, are you set up with the?
Just one more question, really quick.
Okay.
Fledweather on the board says, "Are you ever going to teach?" You don't have to. We're not asking you to reveal your technique, obviously, but
Right.
Jim, he says, "Are you ever going to teach someone the technique so that it goes on when?"
Boy.
You know what I'm saying.
Yes. Is there a legacy going on?
Yes.
I tried. I had the people come in from Western Connecticut, the chairman and all that, and I think it was a little too involved. I think it's what Neil and I think Neil and I couldn't do it again because we keep on adding stuff to it. Right now, my big study is dealing with the upper atmosphere, and so that people, may think I'm crazy, but I use the planets, the sun and the moon, and they have a tremendous. I had said to Mr. G on Channel 11, I said to him earlier in the summer, I said there's going to be the planet Jupiter, which is a very warm and builds a ridge, and it was out on the west coast. I said, so during the summertime, spring, you're going to see ridging on the west coast. And that's what's happened. Now the things have all moved into the middle, and there are two planets together, Saturn and Jupiter. One is cold, one is warm. So you get a zonal flow on the 500. But when the moon comes through, when it hits Jupiter, the ridge pops up. And as you mentioned before, as it hits Saturn, the trough deepens in the east. It's not by chance. You can do it by the day.
So what we're talking about, you're into astrometeorology, Jim.
Yes, indeed.
Let's
Which people would think is crazy.
Hey, whatever works. It's on at the end of the day. It's about getting the forecast right. And however it however it gets you there, that is amazing. I'm going to bring up your graphics here.
Okay.
And now just gotta give me a moment So I got to make sure I got this all set technically. Okay. So let me make
Oh,
sure.
good.
All right. So you can see it.
Yep.
Let me bring it up full screen for everybody to see it at home. Hang on one second here. All right. And presto, it's there.
Yep.
Okay. So, I have starting with the month of November.
Right.
You have above normal temperatures for most of the Northeast, but you do have the New York City area just barely below average.
Right. Now, could that be because in New York City, I go back further on data that I have? I go back into the 1700s by reading David Ludlam's book.
Right.
Joe, you'd be very familiar. Both Joes would be. And I copied down all the big snowstorms, all the very cold temperatures, the very hot temperatures, and I input them into our program. So none of the other stations would go back that far. So if there was a very cold spot, let's say in 1790, that no other station would grab, New York City may have it. That's why I took an average of all the other stations and said, it looks like it's going to be warmer than normal. And what I saw on the GFS the last few days, it seems like most of the storms are going to be heading up through the St. Lawrence River Valley. Did you notice that?
Well, certainly after whatever happens this weekend, I
right.
mean, it does look a little bit different going into November on the GFS, yes.
Yeah, you start to get the return flow around the highs, and you get the thickness lines pretty warm. But so I thought it looked like it would be slightly warmer than normal.
Now your precip is above average for the most part for November.
Right.
And your snowfall, November is a month that really doesn't produce much snowfall down the coast, except on the occasional odd years. But I see that you have
below normal.
Below normal, although you do have Albany and Portland, Maine above normal.
Yeah.
Again, that's because of data twists, correct?
Probably. I would think that. I look at the rest of it and say, they could be anomalies.
Okay. Now for
Now
the winter
look at
weather
December.
months, because the sound you may be hearing in the background are the marching of the snow weenies to the edge of the cliff.
I know.
With this, now you have much above normal temperatures for the Northeast, 5 or more, in some cases 8 or more degrees above average, and quite a bit
below.
subnormal on precipitation. And you have
of course.
Now let me just ask you, when you have on this much below normal on the snowfall map, when you have a -4 for New York, so are you saying that it's going to be 4 inches below the average, the long-term average, which is about 6 for December? Okay.
That's how it works. Yep. That's how Neil has it programmed, that it would take the average from each of the cities and, figure out how much we're going to have and then take the average. Notice up in the snow belt, it doesn't show like much up there at all.
Yeah, those numbers are very much below average. Now let's roll to January, 3.3 above average. It's not. Looks like the numbers in December were a little higher than they are for January, but still above normal.
Right.
And a few spots to the west peppering a little close to normal. Your precip is close to normal.
Yeah.
And your snow is -7. Now, the average in New York City for the month of January, which now is the snowiest month on the recent normals, or if it's not, it will be. You have so that basically says for January, maybe
almost nothing,
maybe an inch or two at most.
Right.
Okay, so far we're like last year.
So December and January are a waste of time.
Okay. February. Now this is the window. I guess.
Right.
So February, you have near normal temperatures if along the coast, some areas to the west above, some
A little
areas to
colder up north,
north,
yeah,
and your precip is above normal.
right.
Okay, and your snowfall is just about
About
average.
normal. Yeah.
Okay, so that gives us 8.
So what's the average snowfall in February? I don't know.
It's about 8 or 9.
What, 9 inches?
How
9
much?
inches
9,
for
Joe?
New York City, yeah.
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 So
So-
that'll be about 9.
So we're not precluding that there'll be no snow. It's that, and one good snowstorm can do it, right? You guys know that.
Clearly.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to point out that I don't know what you think, Jim, that the Farmer's Almanac has been ballyhooing a potential blizzard
Oh, in February.
second week of February.
Yeah.
In fact, here, it says right here, it says, famed forecaster.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Famed forecaster predicting blizzard in northeastern United States. That's the Farmer's Almanac thing. So if they get their big snowstorm in mid-February, they'll be happy.
That would also say why it could be at least normal or even above in some spots. Yeah.
For March, you have
See New York City standing out again.
right. Again, that's because of the big data set.
I would think
And
so, but
so slightly above normal for March,
Yeah.
which is not too shabby. And your snowfall precip is close to normal,
right.
and your snowfall is minus 3.8. So that's basically about 2 inches for March. So just a quick math: 2, 4, 6, 15 inches for the season for New York City. 15, 16 inches.
And how about April?
Oh, we didn't even look at April.
Above normal.
Above normal, not by a lot, but above normal, and your snowfall is 0.2.
No, that's precip.
Precip
isn't it?
is near normal. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And your
And
snowfall
is a little below.
all right, which is I think normal for April is 1, so that's a half an inch. So roughly about 16 inches for the whole season.
Wow.
Which is a little, just about half of normal, which would make it the third subpar year in a row, which has not happened since the 90s.
Wow.
All right.
I pointed this out a few times here on Joe and Joe, and the fact is that Central Park, we've only had 4 other years, like last winter, where we had basically a paucity of snow, less than 5 inches, but yet the year immediately following those years with a lack of any snow came back big time with 30 and 40 inches. So if you just go by that very, very short sample,
Right.
small sample, you would think that maybe this winter, we would perhaps see something closer to normal. You're saying below normal, Jim, but anything over 5 inches will put us ahead of the game from last.
Yeah. You know what's interesting? In doing the computer modeling for this, I had to figure out global warming. And I did it by decades. How much did global warming occur during the 50s? How much during the 60s? How much during the 70s? So when I pick out an analog date in the 60s, I have to add a certain amount of warmth to the forecast. And so if I have a date in the 2010 range, of course I don't add anything because we already had the global warming, or you added very little. So what I've been doing in the last few years is trying to adjust how much global warming is accurate. Now, this year has been, Mr. G is kind of interested in this. We do a lot of work together on it. And the last few months, I've been less than a half a degree off on any month for
That's
New York.
pretty good.
So maybe it's lucky.
I mean, you can't just simply say, here's my forecast, and just arbitrarily continue to keep moving forward or whatever.
Not for 50 years.
Yeah, you've been doing over time. Well, I will say one thing, Jim. If you were making lousy long range forecasts, I don't think the calendar would have gone
No,
as long as it has.
no.
I mean,
This is our 35th year of calendar.
people swear by your prediction.
No, they swear at me, Joe.
They swear at you. Well, again, Joe put the the URL for the Hope for Youth Foundation up on the chat board here. And if any of you are interested in purchasing the calendar, this year's a little bit been tough for you though because of COVID, right, Jim?
Well, I couldn't have a boat ride. I couldn't have the 5K run. I couldn't have a golf outing. Yeah, that's tough. But we vowed this year that we are going to give out all the money to all the groups that we did last year, as much as, and even pick up new groups. So we're not going to, we're going to just hope that this is going to get better next year. And people have been donating and helping us do what we do. And so that makes it easier for me, Joe. And like you and Joe are doing for me right here tonight, there's got to be somebody out there that'll want a calendar. And so,
well, the link is up on the chat board. So,
okay.
But we've had quite a few watchers here tonight, Jim, and also we have lurkers.
I mean, lurkers. Oh yeah.
We have like 150, 130 watching right now, but there are others who are not necessarily on the chat board. People who just tuned in just to watch.
I see.
So I'm hoping that we make a few bucks for the Hope for Youth Foundation tonight by people. If you see a little slight surge in the calendar,
I'll say that's because of Joe and Joe. And I'll say this, Joe Rayo. This is Joe has generously said to me that if I would want him to sit with me when I sign calendars, he would do that. And Joe, if I can get a place to sit to sell calendars, I would find that a privilege if you would be with me.
Well, they'll come up to me and they'll throw a pie in my face. That's what.
I don't think so. You're very well known in Westchester. Very well known.
Well, you're as I said, Jim. You're the living legend of weather, at least here on radio. And so many people know of you and they know of your calendar. And I just want to thank you on behalf of Joe for coming on tonight and talking about your long-range predictions about the Hope for Youth Foundation
and using up all your space. I'm sorry.
No.
You have to get up early tomorrow morning, right? You do the weather on radio for stations. In fact, the station you mentioned up in Maine. Tell everybody who owns that station.
Oh, which reminds me too. I got a question for you. We have one of our regulars, the chairman Scott Briller, who's out tonight working. He does COVID runs, and he doesn't always get to do the show, but he's part of a little feature that we do, Briller Jeopardy, and basically to try to answer all sorts of questions, mostly weather trivia, but sometimes outside. But he asks, since you work, since you know Maine, he says, do you know what the record for Caribou, Maine, consecutive days with at least 1 inch of snow on the ground?
No.
That's the Briller Jeopardy question for the day. The answer is 163 consecutive days from November 10th to April 21st, and it happened last year, 2019. And he wants to also says, does anyone does anyone live in Caribou? This is his question, not mine, because we know folks live in Caribou. There are folks that love it up there, and it is this beautiful country.
Yeah, there's 3 people that live in Caribou.
Okay, so the answer to this question is 3. Okay. That's also how many licks does it take to get to the center of the center of a Tootsie Pop from the old commercial.
Yeah, I remember
with the
that.
owl. 3 was the answer.
But Jim, as I mentioned, you do a station up in Maine, a radio station, and who's the fellow who is a friend of yours who owns that station?
Stephen King.
Stephen King.
That's so cool.
He is such a wonderful person, you would never believe it. Have lunch with him, and he is so intelligent, guys, and you think he writes a lot of books? You should see how many books he reads and remembers everything he reads.
That's
unbelievable.
Yep.
I have to tell you, I've only read one of his novels.
What is it?
But it was about 800 pages. It was 11/22/63.
Oh, I read that.
About a person who was able to go back in time to try to stop the assassination of JFK. And I got to tell you something. Like I only have read, maybe I should read more of his novels, but I was riveted to that book. You couldn't get that book out of my hand for the times I was reading it. And I think it's great that you know him and that he personally asked you to do the weather for his
Well,
station up in Maine.
you know what kind of a feller he is. I'm going to tell this. It's sad, but it's true. When my son was sick, I asked my son Tommy what he wanted for Christmas, and he said nothing. And then he said, maybe Under the Dome by Stephen King. That was his brand new book out at the time. So next day when I did the broadcast, I said to this guy, Bobby Russell, could you see if you could get Under the Dome for Tommy? And he says, when I get finished here, I'll email Stephen and see what we can do. He's out promoting the book. So I said, okay. So the next day when I got on, before I got on the air, he said, I got a story to tell you, but I'll tell you later. And so what he said was, when this was over, he went into his office, sat down at his computer, and wrote, Dear Stephen, and the door opened. And it was Stephen King. And he said, Bobby, what are you doing? He said, I'm writing a note to you about what? He says, about, do you have a book Under the Dome for Jim Witt's son? And he says, do you have one here? And Bobby said, no, it's brand new. You didn't bring any here. He says, I have one at home. Hopped in his car, drove home, got the book, came back, signed it to my son, sent it via FedEx. So we got it the next day, basically. Tommy read it. That was his last book.
I know.
That was his last book. But Stephen King was such a... You just have no idea what kind of a guy he is. He's really a special person. People say, that man must be nuts. He must be crazy. Oh, no. He's not crazy at all. He's a wonderful person.
Well,
Yep.
Again, we have so many,
certainly incredibly gifted.
Oh, my gosh, so smart.
Yeah.
So many people on the chat board, Jim, saying that they thanking you for coming on tonight. Joe Gaffney, one of our veterans on the chat board, said, what an incredible show tonight. Thank you. And Chuck Cardillo, Jim, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We are honored to have you, and whenever you want to come back and promote something with the foundation or talk about a unusual long-range forecast, you're always welcome to come here on Joe and Joe.
I am honored to be on your show. I told you that very much in the beginning. Joe and I worked together for quite a while. Joe was outstanding.
Rayo. Just to be clear.
Oh, you know, not you. Choppy, no.
No, never choppy. This is like my family, because everybody in my family is named Joe. So when someone says Joe, 40 heads turn around. So just to be clear, you're talking about Joe.
Jim was my boss for
I wasn't a boss. I wasn't a boss. Don't give me that. You know, every Tom, Dick, and Harry is named Joe anyway. So that's the way it goes.
Right.
Well, you do.
Good night, guys.
You do have a standing invitation. Anytime you'd like to come on to talk about whatever you'd like to talk about, just you can email me or email Joe, and you can come on board. We'd love to have you.
Oh, I love it. Okay, great.
All right.
Yes, he even has my phone number.
I do.
He called my house on Saturday at 4:30 in the morning.
Nah, sure. I wanted to make sure you were sleeping.
Oh boy!
Tim, thanks again. Thank you so much for coming today.
And you're welcome, guys.
By the way, this show will be up as a podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and a whole host of other places that call podcasts their home. Just search for the Joe and Joe Weather Show, and if you do listen to us on Apple Podcasts, please leave us a review. That would be absolutely terrific. And Jim, thanks again for being here tonight. Joe and I.
Well, you're very welcome.
Going to yap for another minute or two. Good night.
Good night.
Nighty-night.
Good night, JoJo.
I'll see you tomorrow, Joe.
All right, Mr. Rayo, and just again to say thank you for everybody for being here tonight. We had a lot of fun. getting guests on the show is not easy because you're always trying to sync up schedules. But we were so glad that this worked out the way it did schedule wise. And don't forget to get your winter weather gear from our sponsor, Omni True Value Hardware. In West Babylon. Their telephone number is 631-756-1125 for the best prices in town. 1226 North Wellwood Avenue, and the website is omnitruevalue.com. Thanks again, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow night at 7:30 Eastern Time. Good night.